Okay.
Right, start out?
Yep.
Okay, I do have 10 minutes, so I don't have many slides, but just wanted to discuss the Forest Service short and long-term plans for restoration of the fire, of the incident. Go ahead. Okay, many of you have probably already seen this slide, but I just wanted to get everybody on the same page. So we do have when the fire occurs, and then we have suppression repair activities, which many of you were involved in. And then we had BAER assessment and then BAER implementation. So from BAER assessment, we did receive funding for what we had requested, which we'll go into the next slide. And then the two post effects from that BAER implementation, assessment and implementation is salvage and long-term restoration. And I just wanted to point out that under the first three, we do have emergency authority where we don't need to perform NEPA. But the last two, the salvage and the long-term rehab, is where we have to go through environmental review of the lands we plan to treat. Go ahead, David. Okay, so for BAER assessment, this is what we had requested as far as short-term projects that we will implement on Forest Service lands. So we have land treatments, road and trail protection and safety. So we were approved funding for early detection rapid response, which are invasive species of plants. We also have cultural site inspection and protection signs. There were some historical and cultural items that were identified within the burn area. Then we do have roughly 35 miles of road stabilization that we plan to perform, campground stabilization of Crystal Springs, as well as 8 miles of trail stabilization. And we also have protection and safety for everybody out in the bird area. So hazard warning signs, campground mitigations at Crystal Springs, and then also hazard tree removal around those work sites. That's the takeaway for this authorization to implement. Okay, David, go next. Okay, so now we're getting into the NEPA phase with salvage and sanitation. And also you can sort of wrap that up all in the same: salvage, sanitation, and then long-term restoration. So really the point of our salvage sale is to, or not sale, but point of our salvage is to improve public and employee safety, capture remaining economic value of the dead trees, and then reduce post-fire fuels, prevent excessive accumulation of fuels. Now, I've been working with our vegetation staff, and we are putting together an industry field trip to discuss the options of a salvage sale from our industry field trip. But there's a lot of factors that do go into it. Are there available mills within the area that can accept this material, et cetera? So those are the type of discussions that we're going to have, and is there overall general interest? Okay, David. And again, just sort of wrapping this up all in the same term, we have the long-term process that focuses on repairing infrastructure and natural resource damage caused by the fires, and can take many years for us to get through the NEPA process and actually come to an agreement with what we actually want to do on those lands. But some of the items that I listed in the PowerPoint: planting trees, reestablishing native species, repairing damage to facilities, restoring habitats, and then treating those invasive plants. But I don't necessarily want to put a time frame on it. But with NEPA, this could take up to a couple of years to get through our system. Okay, go ahead. Okay, again, working with our vegetation staff, these are the areas that we did identify for treatment polygons. And there's a lot of factors that go into why we picked these specific polygons: road access, how far are those trees off of that road, slope, etc. And as far as the NEPA goes, do we have what kind of species or what kind of environmental review would cause us to have concern with treating in a specific area. But just for a better visual, because that map may be hard to read for some, but these were the areas that were identified that we could have those treatments performed for removal of the timber within the burn area. And some of those restoration efforts will include sanitation, aerial seeding, by a drone, salvage, and then traditional reforestation. Go ahead. Biggest question that I, as well as everybody may have, how will this project be funded? So I have identified a few that we've been looking at, which there probably could be more upon further research, but there is a joint Forest Service and Natural Resource Conservation Service Joint Chiefs Landscape Restoration Partnership. I'm currently working with our veg staff in order to write a proposal, which we'll see if we get approved for that.
Go get.
Our veg staff is also working with CAL FIRE with potential grants that they may have. Also a Sierra Nevada Conservancy grant, and then other grants that National Forest Foundation may find to be able to assist us in the long run. And then, go ahead, David. And then just pretty much in closing, for anything that is in and around Forest Service lands, we do value the local input. We will be at the table with you the entire time that we're putting these plans together. But when it comes to the NEPA process and approvals, we will try and get that implemented and through our system as quickly as possible. So I know that there's going to be questions in at the end. So I'll just end it there. Thank you.
I get 2 million.
Sure.
I should at least.
Cold. Oh my god.
My hands are always cold.
Go put on some clothes.
My hands feel like this. I mean, usually they're numb. They're so cold. Sometimes I just go run my hands under warm water.
You want to build you a fire?
Okay, obviously I messed up a little bit on the agenda, but thank you very much, Brian. Next speaker will be from the Natural Resources Conservation Service, Technical and Financial Assistance, Jessica Gorder from the District Conservationist. Sorry.
That's okay, we're going improv. While he's getting that set up, my name is Jessica Werder. I'm the district conservationist with the Natural Resources Conservation Service. Our office is located in Minden, Nevada. Our office is unique because we do service both northern parts of Alpine and Mono County, as well as counties in Nevada. We do cross both state lines. Would it be better if I took my mask off? Yeah. Don't sound like Charlie Brown's teacher. That's okay, you can go ahead and go to the next slide if you'd like. So the Natural Resources Conservation Service was born from the Dust Bowl. We've had some different names. Some may remember us as the Soil Conservation Service, but now we are the NRCS. Can you go ahead and click next? We are under the Farm Production and Conservation section, and we have some sister agencies, one of which you'll hear from tonight, the Farm Service Agency. And we all work together. If you mind, click the next slide. Our NRCS's big goal is to help people help the land. There's a lot of layers underneath that with missions and visions, but at the end of the day, that's what we're here for. Can you click next, please? So what do? We provide financial and technical assistance to private landowners, and we develop what's called a conservation plan. Basically, we take a look at what's going on the property and we see what resource concerns or problems there are and how NRCS can help improve those resources. Can you click next, please? So this is a really nice, quick and easy graphic. The first step to get assistance is to give us a call. Give us a call, we'll come and take a look at your property. Our office does have a couple of agricultural engineers on staff. My background is in rangeland management, but we also have a couple planners that have rangeland and forestry backgrounds as well. We'll come and we'll do an assessment on your land. So are we looking at irrigation improvements? Or in this case, are we looking at reforestation, some rehabilitation, soil erosion mitigation? We can look at all of that. And we are your taxpayer dollars at work. So we'll come, even if you don't just, or if you decide not to pursue financial assistance, we're still here to help. Excuse me, help you guys. Application, if you do want to pursue financial assistance, we do have some eligibility requirements. We share a lot of our paperwork with the Farm Service Agency. One of the big requirements is we have an adjusted gross income threshold. You cannot make over $900,000 average over the past 3 tax years. There's also some highly erodible land and wetland conservation forms that we would fill out, but we are here to help you through that process because it can feel a little overwhelming, but we try to make it as easy as possible for you guys. Then if we continue on with the contract, we will provide cost estimates for you. And I'll get into that a little bit later. We would go through ranking. Basically, the way we rank is we look at what's going on the ground, what problems are we solving, what practices are we doing to solve them, and it assigns a number, and we start funding from the top down. Can you put the next slide, please? So I just want to reiterate that the first thing you guys need to do is reach out to us. This is obviously a great opportunity to do so. We have a sign-in sheet that's separate. If you'd like more information or have us come and conduct a site visit with you, please come by and we'll have you sign your name, address, and some contact information, and we'll reach out to you. I realize this is a big crowd and it might be kind of hard to talk with everybody in depth. So please come on over when we get done. Next, please. The biggest program for financial assistance we have is the Environmental Quality Incentives Program, also referred as EQIP. This is our most widely used program and it covers a wide range of practices. Soil mitigation or soil erosion mitigation, reforestation, range seeding, those all fall into this program. You must be a landowner or operator. We can do work on public lands, but we do need to work through the permittee on that. We cannot work with state or federal governments directly. And then we can do cooperative contracts between multiple landowners if it seems necessary. Next, please. Within those contracts, you are putting, it's a contract. You're putting yourself, you're saying, I agree to install these practices to NRCS standards and specifications over X amount of years. Now, it sounds a little scary because getting in bed with the federal government is a little scary sometimes, right? However, through the whole process, we make it very clear what we would be financially assisting you on, what you would be receiving from us, and then what those standards and specifications are before you sign a contract. We are not an emergency program. The EQIP is not an emergency program, something that you can go and install next week. However, we do have waivers to start under specific circumstances, but those are in a case-by-case situation. To comply with the contract, you need to at least start, preferably complete one practice within 1 year. To those practice standards and specifications. And then all of our standards and specifications have a lifespan, which means we expect that practice to be maintained for X amount of years. And that differs between the practices. Next, please. So we are financial assistance. We do not pay 100% of the actual cost. We pay on what we call like a flat rate. So I put a couple examples up here. I realize that's very small. But an example would be like fence. We would pay per linear foot of fence. You'll also see that we have historically underserved rates. Historically underserved people are those beginning farmers, socially disadvantaged, or limited resource farmers, and we have definitions we can go over with you on those individually as well. The difference between a regular rate and an HU rate is a regular rate attempts to pay anywhere from 50 to 75%. Now I say attempts because our cost lists are not set state by state by state. And they are set at a regional level. So they take, I think it's like 3 states, and including California. So that's where knowing what we will pay up front, that gives you the opportunity to go find a contractor or figure out materials and see what would be coming out of your pocket before you sign a contract with us. Next, please. Our payments are on a reimbursal. So most of the time, what that's going to mean is you're going to need to hire that contract, install those practices, implement those practices. And once they're completed, we would come out and do the inspection and make sure they meet our practice specifications. And then we reimburse you via direct deposit. We can do assignments of payments if you have a contractor that would like to receive that payment rather than it go through you to the contractor, but you as the participant request that. And then I will say that since you are receiving monies from the federal government, it does end up on your taxes too. Next, please. So I'm going to go over a couple of example practices that we can do. This is not a complete list, but just some that I felt could be the most useful. So replacing fence. Now, one thing I will say about our program is we require new materials. So when I say replacing fence, the fence is completely burned to the ground or it's totally unusable. It's all new materials to install. Next, please. We can do irrigation improvements such as diversion structures, or here we have a cross check. We can also do irrigation pipeline, earthen ditches, whatever suits your land. Next, please. Grade stabilization. If we are starting to see gullies running down your property, we can put a design together and help financially assist with that. Next. Stream bank shoreline protection. One thing I will say here is depending on what shoreline we're working on or stream bank, we may have to help you pursue permits, but again, case by case situation. Next, please. Critical area planting. Now this is basically seeding, but seeding at a higher rate in targeted locations, and it's typically for soil erosion mitigation. Next. Tree shrub establishments. So we can help do plantings for trees and shrubs. This is just an example when Washoe Valley had their fire a couple years back. Next. Tree shrub pruning. So this is essentially limbing up those trees. Next. Forest stand improvement. Now this can lump multiple practices, including pruning. It could also include brush management for your understory. We don't want all this brush to come back. It also can be thinning out live or dead trees as well. Next. And then treating that residue. Next. Explainer, keep going. We're going to skip questions and go ahead. All right, so I did not include my email. However, I do have a card for those present. You're welcome to email me. My address is Jessica, JESSICA, .Gwerder, GWERDER, @USDA.gov. Thank you.
Thank you. For those who are not aware of it, Rich and Kate Harvey went through the application process, and if I remember correctly, they were granted help for their property just a month ago or something like that.
That's another thing I'll briefly mention. Because we work with private landowners, I am actually not at liberty to share who we are or are not working with. So please forgive me for dodging that.
It's all right. Rich Harvey, I'll give you permission to use his name. Okay. Now related agency, the Farm Services Agency Emergency Forest Restoration Program with Betty Hullick from the Arlington Farm Services Agency, County Executive Director.
Jessica covered quite a bit of the stuff that is the basis for our applications as well. You know, the historically underserved, the new farmers, beginning farmers and ranchers. A lot of our requirements are the same as NRCS. The only thing different on this program, the EFRP, which is Emergency Forest Restoration Program, we do not require the adjusted gross income, you know, the $900,000 3-year average. So that's waived. Also, there's no requirement for the highly erodible wetland certification from this. So next one, Dave, please. So this program is specifically for owners of non-industrial private forest, and is to restore the forest lands that have been destroyed by a natural disaster such as fire, provides emergency funding and technical assistance. We work with, it would be normally the Forest Service, but I believe it's going to be one of the conservation districts, probably the Alpine Conservation District, for the technical service on this program. And our goal is the same as what NRCS is, to reduce erosion to less than the soil loss tolerance, prevent degradation of environmental benefit from reoccurring, and it needs to be maintained for the practice lifespan as well. Next one, Dave, please. So what the Farm Service does, we had to request implementation of this program, and we've already done that. It's been approved by the national office. We have estimated at least 5 million, if not a lot higher, of the cost share. Once we have our applications put in, we'll do the financial request. So it was approved on 9/20. The sign up ends on November 18th, and we may request an extension on that. We can also accept late filed applications if it's justified. We have to determine land eligibility and also person or entity eligibility. We prepare the agreements, we determine cost share, and provide payments to the producers or to the assignees. And the one difference is too, if a producer clearly has adequate financial resources, the county committee, which is what Farm Service Agency works with, is farmer elected committees. They can deny financial aid if you actually have the ability to do restoration yourself. Next one, David, please. The cost share is up to 75% of eligible expenses, and this would go on your expenses, or we use NRCS's established cost shares. There's a minimum of $1,000 cost of restoration, which I don't think there's going to be any problem meeting that from what we can see. Payment limitation of $500,000 per person or legal entity for each disaster. And we've had some discussion that we may be able to split a property where natural resource or another entity could probably go in and help on part of the practice on one part, and we might be able to help on another piece. And like NRCS, our payments can be assigned. Next slide, please. Again, the maximum payment levels for each restoration is 75% of the established cost or of your actual cost of restoring the practice. Sorry, my finger is dry. Who is eligible? Private persons or legal entities who own or lease non-industrial private forest. Can you move to the next one, Dave, please? Sorry. And of course, not used for industrial purposes. And it had to have or has had an existing tree covered on it. What is not eligible is a district with taxing authority, federal agencies, state agencies, or political subdivisions of a state. Next slide, Dave. And land eligibility, again, is land that had an existing tree cover, physically located in the county affected by the natural disaster, which covers Alpine and Douglas County, and has damage that will endanger natural resources if left untreated. And some of the items eligible for financial assistance is labor, seed, seedling, or other new used material. If you're using used material, it has to be approved by the county committee. Covers sales taxes and the services. Some eligible components of all practices is the debris removal, temporary cover, tree establishment, fence. It can be adjusted due to the age of the fence. So the older the fence, the less the reimbursement for the For the fence, ornamental fences are not eligible, but also tubes, netting to protect new trees from wildlife, road repair, wildlife enhancement, seeding, fire breaks, and also some weed control as well. Of the ineligible costs would be an engineering charge, consultant fees unless specifically permitted in the practice write-up, providing land, right to land and or use of land or water, power sources unless they're determined to be the least costly way to go about it. Ineligible is supplemental requirements such as foregoing a harvest, producer's own transportation costs, revenue loss due to or reduction due to the disaster, rent or other costs of using land or donated material. Personal labor and equipment is eligible. You need to be able to provide some sort of a documentation such as invoices, canceled check, paid receipts. For personal labor, you need to have a statement with dates of what your work was done, the cost per hour for labor, type of equipment, charge for equipment, type of cost of material. And partial payments can be made if you get part of your practice done. You can, as long as you agree to complete your practices, you can get a partial payment on it. In the technical service agencies, conservation districts, NRCS, and Forest Service, and the producer is not required to use the technical service through this program. If you find your own technical service provider, there's a chance that we can reimburse you for the financial cost of that. So the technical agencies will provide damage evaluation, the initial assessment, propose necessary restoration practices, and provide cost estimates. Time frame again, the sign up started 9/20, it goes through 11/18. You can request a waiver for starting practice before filing the application. 2 years to complete the restoration. A 1-year extension may be granted when conditions are beyond your control. And practices must be maintained for 10 years, beginning January 1st, after the practice is completed or until we lose control of the land. The new producer or leasee agrees in writing to maintain practices throughout its lifespan. I think that's it.
Thank you. Okay, moving on to Cal OES.
I'm going to stand up or
Whatever you feel good.
can you guys hear and see me okay from here? Great. All right, well, good evening. My name is Cole Glenwright. I'm with the Governor's Office of Emergency Services, also known as Cal OES. I'm going to talk a little bit about the Consolidated Debris Removal Program, which is one of the recovery programs that Cal OES is standing up for the Tamarack Fire here. Although I'm joined by Derek, who's one of my colleagues on the Watershed Task Force, and will be available for any questions on some of their work. Before we get started, I speak at a lot of town halls like this. You're remiss not to start by saying, we're so sorry for your loss, whether you lost your home or your lands were damaged. On behalf of all the state of California, we're committed to doing everything we can within our authorities and our programs to assist Alpine County and all its residents in their recovery. Looking for a slide deck, it's not a slide deck. So the Consolidated Debris Removal Program is a 2-phase program. The first phase is referred to as phase 1, and that's the household hazardous waste assessment and removal. That phase was completed on the impacted properties pretty early on after the fire. You may have seen some hazmat teams from the State Department of Toxic Substance Control in and around the community. That's what they were doing. They were looking for household hazardous waste includes things like batteries, chemicals, paints, bulk asbestos, car batteries. So that's an emergency operation we do under the county's health authorities. They went in, they did that. It was all completed in about a 48 to 72 hour time frame, so a quick process. Phase 2 is really the larger scale phase. And phase 2 includes a couple components. And I'll dive through each of them, but before we get into the technical components, one of the really important distinctions between phase 1 and phase 2 is that phase 2 is an opt-in program. So phase 1, we went in under our emergency authorities and did it because it was a health hazard, it needed to be done immediately. For phase 2, you have an option here in the next few weeks to decide whether you're eligible for this program, and if so, whether you want to sign up for this program. And I'll talk a little bit about how enrollment works, how the funding piece works, and then if there's questions about other options to do this sort of work outside the government program, I can either speak to that, or we have some folks from your county team that can. But the phase 2 consolidated debris removal program is really two distinct scopes of work. The first is structural debris removal. So we're talking about the physical cleanup of homes or other structures that burn down. That's a full environmental cleanup we do. So it started actually, I believe earlier today, with some site assessments being done by one of our contractors, Tetra Tech. You may see them or their cars in your community. They did site assessments, some asbestos assessments today. Over this month, potentially into early next month, we'll be awarding and mobilizing the actual structural debris removal contractor. So for the folks that have signed up for this program or other properties, public agencies that we're working with, you'll start to see heavy equipment mobilizing in to do that cleanup. And that's really kind of the robust process there, where the state contractor will transport all of that waste to an approved landfill. Some of that material is diverted and recycled, and ultimately we'll scrape down to the bare earth below the building, and we'll do some confirmation soil analysis to confirm that we removed all the environmental health hazards. And principally, we look for, I mentioned asbestos, we'll do some additional analysis to see if there's asbestos on site, and then we'll look for heavy metals, things like lead, arsenic, that our studies have shown us over the past few years. And unfortunately, in the state of California, we're getting pretty good at this fire debris removal thing. Our team cleaned up the town of Paradise after the Camp Fire, about 11,000 homes we cleaned up there. Cleaned up Berry Creek last year, Happy Camp. This year we're posturing to do pretty much all the fires you've probably seen on the news. So we know what we're dealing with, and we know that we will see some of these heavy metal constituents in these home sites. And that's what our cleanup program is really designed to do, is to abate that health threat. So our teams will go out, they'll do some confirmation sampling against established cleanup goals, which will consider federal and state cleanup, or health and human screening levels rather, and then we'll do some background analysis to confirm what the appropriate cleanup standard is here. But ultimately, we'll test that soil, we'll remove a little additional soil if needed, and we'll certify that the properties that we work on are complete to a health standard that our professional geologists and professional engineers will stand behind. So that's, in a very high level, the structural debris removal component of the phase 2 program. In running in parallel to that is the hazard tree removal function. And I'll spend a little time on this because I think what we do at Cal OES, hazard tree removal, is a little different than some of the other speakers. And principally, Cal OES is not a land management agency, we're a disaster management agency. So our scope is going to be probably a little quicker and a little more precise or less broad than some of the other agencies might be able to offer you. But we're going to be looking for hazard trees that are threatening a public road or other public infrastructure. So if your property abuts a road, a county maintained road, a state highway, a state or locally managed road, those are trees that we would have our certified arborists and registered professional foresters assess and determine whether they present a hazard to falling onto that road. Of note, you can sign up only for that scope, meaning if you don't have a burned structure, but you have fire damaged trees and you're adjacent to a public road and you'd like to enroll in phase 2 for that component, that's an option. Now you can't only sign up for that if you also have structural debris. It's one program. If only the hazard tree function is applicable to you, you can still sign up for the program. And if you are adjacent to a public road, we'll take a look at those trees. And ultimately, any tree that we determine to be a hazard to the public road, our licensed timber operator will fell and remove off the property to leave it safe for the general community's rebuilding. So that's another function that unfortunately we're getting fairly good at. We just wrapped up taking about 40,000 trees out of the town of Paradise, about 100,000 trees across that burn scar overall. And we have huge hazard tree removal operations wrapping up from the 2020 fires. So really sad to see the number of trees that perish in these fires, but we think we have a fairly refined, pretty surgical process for using really qualified arborists to go in and only establish which trees are really going to be a hazard and that we can take care of for the landowner. So that's at a high level what our scope of work is in phase 2. I'll talk a little bit about kind of the mechanics of how it works. So I mentioned it's an opt-in or opt-out program. And the process for opting in is with a form called a right of entry or an ROE. And you may have seen that from your county staff already, but it's essentially a document you sign with your county staff. So Alpine County here is implementing the program from an enrollment perspective, and then the state will come in and do the work. But you would sign a right of entry permit that provides legal access to the state and county government and our contractors to go in and do the work. It also provides some information about your insurance. And so a question that we always get at these is what's the funding piece, right? And some of my federal partners spoke about kind of a reimbursement-based program. Our program is different in that we bring in the contractors, we do the work up front. But if you do have private insurance that's specific for debris removal or hazard tree removal or the work that we performed, after the fact, the county will seek to recollect that and only that provision from you. So we are not looking to recoup all the costs of the work. This is not a cost share, but there is a requirement under federal law that prohibits probably duplication of benefits from occurring. So if you had private insurance funding for debris removal that you didn't spend on debris removal, that's funding that later we would look to recoup only up to the cost of the cleanup. I will say, in my experience in doing this, folks, private insurance for these services is almost without exception less than the actual cost of doing the work. So any additional costs there, which can be tens of thousands of dollars, come out of the state's disaster recovery funds, the disaster response emergency operations account. One other note, because we're speaking a little bit, and the Forest Service spoke earlier, there is a fairly bright line between the state's authorities to do this sort of cleanup and the federal government. So our program doesn't touch federal lands. That's solely under the jurisdiction of the federal government. We're looking at privately owned lands and then county infrastructure, things like that. So just a note there, because I know we do a fairly substantial component of that. So again, just kind of to stress where we are in phase 2 debris removal. We started that with the assessment phase over the next month-ish. We look forward to bringing in the actual debris removal crews and the hazard removal crews behind them. And ultimately, this whole program is designed to remove those immediate hazards that are gonna, could prevent you from rebuilding and recovering. And so our program is geared to help you take care of that in an expedited, cost-efficient manner. So with that, I don't know, are we pausing for questions here or?
Yes.
Okay, well, I guess I'll turn it back. But if you have any questions that I can't answer here, my team will hang out, or at least I'll hang out, and I'd be happy to speak with you after or give you some contact information. So thank you for the time.
Yeah, for those that have questions regarding private land, we've got a few minutes, 10 minutes for questions. And the most important thing, of course, is get these people's cards so that you can contact and follow up with them later. So does anybody have any questions on the, first of all, in the room? Can't believe it. Sorry, can you speak up?
Did Susie arrive? Just wanted to double check.
Susan Coker, did you come in while we were looking? I guess the answer is no.
So I'm John Pickett. I'm a registered professional forester with CTL Forest Management. And we
Could
just
you come
finished
up
a
and
project
use the microphone, because otherwise people online can't hear you.
name is John Pickett, RPF with CTL Forest Management. And we just finished the campfire project, 2/3 of the campfire project with Cole and his team from Cal OES. And I've just got to say, please encourage anyone who's got fire damage, sign an ROE, have people come out and assess your property. It's so important that you be in this program. The Sierra Pacific Industries owns all the sawmills in Northern California. They've lost as much land by percentage as everybody else. There's not going to be any way to dispose of wood. Most of the programs that NRCS funds will not allow for the commercialization of wood. So you can't even remove wood that has value from your property just to get it off if it will go to a commercial use. So it's so critically important that you encourage all your neighbors who've had impacts to sign up for this program. It is the best way to get this mitigated and at least the dangers abated, and then go on with restoration and all the other hard work we've got ahead of us. I'll be sticking around, and so if you do want to talk to a forester, I'll be available to chat with you in the back as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Come on up and use the mic.
I just have a question because I'm on Pleasant Valley Road in Marshallville. and a couple of houses up was destroyed. And there were a bunch of people there today. And I'm hoping it's part of this kind of program, but is there any way people find out what is happening at someone's house, like 3 doors?
The question was about, there was some activity around the Pleasant Valley Road where the 2 houses were destroyed,
That
and
part?
what's going on and how the people find out, and I'll let Cole answer that.
Yeah, I'm looking at this to see if you recognize the specific address.
Those are the 2 addresses at the top of Pleasant Valley Road,
Right, yeah.
and we had the site assessment.
So you were there today?
Up there today, this morning.
Okay.
Great, yeah, so what that was then was that was our professional contractor, which is Tetra Tech, doing a site assessment and an asbestos assessment. So to get to the general question though, like, will you understand kind of what's going on? Yeah, my team is working really hard right now to roll out an online map that'll show you each of the properties that have signed up for this program and what status they are in it. So you would see, oh, that one just went from site assessment ready to site assessment complete. Yeah. And just if you see them around, their logo is a big T and a little t for Tetra Tech. We haven't procured and hired the debris removal contractor yet. We're in the process of doing that right now, actually. But once that's selected, we'll make sure your county staff share with you what that firm is, so you understand, if you see another contractor working, what their role and responsibilities are.
Any more questions regarding private land? Going once? Going twice? Going. Okay, moving on to public land. Paul?
Good evening, Paul Fuseli, Assistant Field Manager, Sierra Front Field Office. Good to be here this evening. As you know, I was one of the agency administrators in Tamarack Fire for the BLM. It's been a long haul to get to this process, and I'm here to brief you on our plan. And then I'll have our California and Nevada State BLM Forester just give a couple words about salvage logging potential that might be happening on BLM managed plants.
There you go.
So we just completed, they just went up my presentation. We just completed about a 30-day planning process on emergency stabilization and rehabilitation. It's a little different process than the Forest Service's BAER team. But in the end, the goals are nearly the same. That's initially to protect life and property, and then start the process of rehabilitation on the land. Next slide. Go back one. So I just wanted to point out that the team, my staff that helped develop this plan, a lot of them have been working in this area for over 20 years and have valued and treasured this area just as much as you guys have.
Sure.
I've been living this plan, so I have all the slides memorized.
There you
go. Okay. I was probably the least important person as the team leader. Really, as everyone else that was on the ground doing assessments and helping write the plan. Next slide. So I had a couple questions. There is actually BLM managed land, as many of you know, in this area. About 9,000 acres in the fire, and about 5,000 acres just right around Markleyville here. So this is it's a super busy map, but this map sort of outlines where all of our treatments are. And we have a wide variety of treatments. We're great aerial seed, 5,000 acres, pretty much all the BLM managed lands on that polygon with a native seed mix. The blue polygons, where we do some erosion control measures. Hunter falling, small little check dams, as appropriate as determined by the USGS hazard debris flow model. We're going to rebuild the Indian Creek campground based on funding. We're going to work on rebuilding the trails that go from Kurtz Lake up to Summit Lake and back down to the reservoir, as well as we're gonna try to reestablish the trail that went from Kurtz Lake down to the river that hasn't been worked on in a couple of years. There's gonna be some other areas where we're be doing hazard tree removal in and around the campground. As you all know, trees in the campground, sort of a unique thing for BLM in Nevada, especially here in Alpine County, at least for me. It's the one spot I had trees where I could hug, and I sort of miss them. I'll be honest about it. I just get all black when I hug them now. But anyway, we're going to go into that campground fairly judiciously, using science, using the best available information, and remove the trees as we need to remove the trees. As you know, the campground was closed previously for some maintenance actions. So now we have to pay to keep that new bathroom in storage that we were supposed to install this fall. We'll get that campground open as soon as we can. We have some planned reforestation in the campground. We're looking at using some climate adapted species, giant sequoias. We can get those in the campground. We'll get them growing just as fast as we can and get them just as large as we can, just as soon as we can. Next slide, let's see what I'm missing. Okay, I'm probably running out of time pretty quickly here, but our actions are broken into two different categories: emergency suppression, and those have a very high likelihood of getting funded this year. So it's pretty small, but pretty much we've got 3 years worth of implementation actions on that. Just like the Forest Service, we're gonna do a lot of public hazard signing. We put up some signs at Hangman's Bridge, let the public know, the rafting public, that they might be encountering some debris in the river. We're gonna do hazard tree removal, talked about that already. We're gonna get a new fence around the Kurtz Lake and maybe not Kurtz Lake, around Indian Creek, to help ensure the shoreline integrity there. Mentioned the aerial seeding. We're gonna do a bit of brush planting on some critical areas. We're gonna have increased law enforcement patrols to ensure the cultural areas that are significant remain in place. And then as needed, do some herbicide treatment where invasives are beginning to take hold. On the burned area rehab, that funding's a little more sketchy. It's based on an annual appropriation from Congress, and we know how that works out. Boy, I can't even read what I have up there. But we're going to do some facility repair and reestablishment, and that's the Indian Creek Campground. Pretty much for the next 3 or 4 years, we're going to be asking for funding to replace all the minor facilities at that campground. And that was everything except for the vault toilet that didn't burn. That vault toilet would have burned. I would have been able to replace that one, but I couldn't replace the flush toilet that burned. We could do some fencing removal. We had some duplicate fences that we didn't really need for some range allotments that are no longer active. So we're gonna pull that old fencing out. That's a hazard to the public, to wildlife. We're gonna reestablish some fencing in Bagley Valley, and we're gonna do some spring exclosures in Bagley Valley to help protect the riparian area. And why don't we go to the next slide? And really, I hope this is a big Band-Aid on the landscape, but it's not the only thing that needs to happen on the landscape. I'm really most interested in trying to establish a plan that looks outward into the future. For the next 20, 30 years, where do we want BLM managed lands in Alpine County to look like? And of course, this is important to get done with the Forest Service, private landowners, and the rest of the community. Corinne?
Good evening. I do not like microphones. So I'm Corinne Francis. I'm the state forester for BLM in California and Nevada. I gotta hold it closer. Okay. So I'm the state forester for BLM in California and Nevada. And, you know, I've lived through a lot of disasters in the last 5 years in that role of the campfire, car fire, the bug mortality and the drought mortality. So I've been working across the jurisdictions a lot, and I really feel for this community. And I'm looking at assessing what we can do to restore the BLM lands, specifically concentrating on the recreation area. And we found about 110 acres of, you know, salvage areas that are going to be assessed by the field office for removal of those dead trees. And we also are assessing the trails and the roads, and we're looking at working with industry to do that. The other part that Paul was talking about was integrating science. And so we brought out our regional entomologist to go through our fire killed guidelines. And I'd like to share that with the community through David. I'll probably send some of that literature over. So we put in plots to kind of look at crown scorch and basal scarring and attract those trees with some green needles into the spring bud break and see what kind of trees will survive through the fire. And so we are really trying to take as little of the green trees as possible and kind of follow them through the next season. So we won't be logging those areas right away. It'll be next field season. You know, it's going to be a good tool for us to kind of get those trees out of the recreation area where people like to hike and recreate. And then our next science-based endeavor will be looking at, like Paul said, climate adapted species and moving them, assisting their migration into the fire area through science. We're going to release our campfire climate-based reforestation plan on Tuesday. And I can also share that with folks to see how we use those concepts in reforestation. And then, you know, we have a deck right here. We're going to get that removed in the next month, hopefully. Found a buyer last week. And, you know, definitely hit me up. I've worked in this area for over a decade. I knew every tree in that campground as a district forester. And it's really sad. The other factor is I worked on the airport fire. I worked with the county to remove the dead trees there and plant it. And I had a conversation with the county today. They're interested in the same partnership. And so we'll be looking at removing some county trees and maybe planting and helping them plant. And that's it. Thank you.
One additional thing, I'll say, as long as you guys have questions, I'll say, and I'll answer them.
Okay, moving on to Liberty Utilities.
Hi, everyone. My name is Peter Stolten. I'm the manager of vegetation management for Liberty. And with me also is Jen Gunther. She is, I'm gonna have to wait for the slide because I can't remember her title. It's too long. Senior Manager of Customer Experience and Energy Efficiency, something like that. But if you need help with anything, talk to Jen, unless it's a vegetation related question and there's power lines in the vicinity, then you can talk to me. So yeah, we're just gonna kind of go through really quickly who Liberty is, just to give kind of an overview of what we do, what we manage. You know, I know we've heard a lot about what we're going to do or what will be done. I'm going to talk a little bit about what has been done by Liberty in you know, emergency restoration that occurred, and then, you know, kind of some of our thoughts on, you know, what our participation will be, you know, moving forward. So on the next slide, you can actually go to. So yeah, so Liberty is we're a small investor-owned utility. So we have about 49,000 customers, all in the state of California. And we cover about 724 overhead miles of distribution and transmission lines across 7 counties. And that includes, what, we have 24,700 poles. And, you can see on the map there, actually you can't even see because it's kind of covered up, but Portola is our northernmost service area, and going down to Cova Walker, our southernmost area. So it's about 150-mile stretch, according to Google Maps, if you stay in the state of California, but you can go through Reno. I guess it's a little bit shorter, but either way is, for a small utility, we have a pretty large area that we cover. And, we have our service areas kind of split between North Lake. We have an office that handles most of our North Lake operations, and out of our South Lake Tahoe office, we handle our South Lake operations. One thing also worth noting is that 90% or over 90% of our service area is designated high fire threat district by the California Public Utilities Commission. So, when you hear about wildfire mitigation plans and things, everything that's coming out of the state for utilities to improve and enhance wildfire mitigation, a lot of utilities you think about are, large investor-owned utilities where have maybe single-digit numbers of the land that they operate on or that they lease or, have their lines running on within those high fire threat districts where a lot of this mitigation is occurring. Whereas we are basically, we don't even count what's not high fire threat district because it's kind of pointless to say like, oh, let's just skip these couple spans and then pick up mitigation afterwards. So we basically treat 100% of our system as high fire threat district. Next slide. So for Tamarack Fire restoration, we basically came in as soon as we were allowed to by incident command, and immediately started assessing the area for damage, assessing damaged infrastructure, damaged trees along our infrastructure, and started initially, mitigating those hazards. And so, there was a lot of work that was done. Over 6 miles of our infrastructure was destroyed and damaged that we had to rebuild in that time frame. And gosh, we replaced, let me look at my slide here, over 150 poles. Some of those because of the area and the terrain and being as rugged as it is, we had to bring in helicopters to replace some poles, which usually is at least a 6-month process just to get approval for that. And a lot of work that was happened. The 6 miles is equated to 22 miles of conductor that we pulled out, disposed of, and replaced, and more than 5,100 trees were felled in the process. And so with that in mind, you heard from Cal OES as far as who's out there doing the assessments, and we staff certified arborists, registered professional foresters, very highly qualified people that have done this work before, that came in and did that work and made the assessments and the determinations of which trees were going to be a hazard to the workers trying to rebuild the lines. A lot of these areas were still pretty active, and you get trees flare up and things like that while you're working them. And so, making sure that the people rebuilding the lines were going to be safe. And then also, once we go through the entire effort of rebuilding the lines, that we're not leaving a hazard so that, we walk away and then now you just have another incident occur because a hazard tree that was left is now failed and struck our facility. So there's a really big effort to get that done, but something that we wanted to be cognizant of, knowing, the area of working in this area. We do work on a lot of public land, and that's something that, is maybe worth stating that is, we're not a land owner or land manager. We're a leasee, we're a permittee on these lands, so we operate either under some sort of operating agreement or a permit or an easement or something, that gives us the ability to own and operate the infrastructure, and we have obligations to do so. But yeah, ultimately, a lot of what we do is permitted by the landowner first before we can do so. And so knowing kind of the cultural and environmental sensitivity that we occur around here, we did follow, all of the typical resource protection measures that we would in our normal operations when falling trees, trying to make sure that we weren't, leaving anything in water courses or where we knew there was steep terrain, trying to either leave the trees in a manner that would either hold into the slopes or, basically not cause any more environmental damage that had already occurred. And then also being sensitive to the potential of archaeological sites in the area too. So all the work you could, those may be some pole setters too. There's some guys working, doing trees. Almost all of the work was done by hand crews, just guys walking, from tree to tree with a chainsaw, no mechanical operations except for one location on private land up at the north part, just by Woodford. It's kind of coming down 89 on the west-hand side of the road. We did use some mechanical equipment there, but otherwise, yeah, all handwork, really, really hard work, and but we got it done. It took over 125 people on site to do it. I don't know if it was on the slide or not, but we have 125 employees, so obviously those weren't all employees, but bringing in contractors, we probably, at least for tree crews, probably like tripled what we normally would have on site. That 5,100 tree number, I mean, we usually will work about 11,000 trees a year in the past couple of years, and we do about a 40 to 45% removal rate. So, I mean, in that 2-week period, we had to mitigate as many hazard trees as we did almost all of last year. So, anyways, yeah, it's really happy with all that work done. We had no injuries. Everything got back, in operating condition. And we're really happy with the end result that, we did what we could to get the power back on efficiently and quickly. On the next slide, kind of get into post-fire support, and, really, I think Liberty is here with, kind of a similar standpoint as a lot of the private landowners in the community, is just kind of wanting to learn what other plans are in development, what things are going on that we can be a partner with. We want to continue supporting the, long-term restoration of the area, and, yeah, just really see what we can do to continue to help, for long-term, like Paul had said, we're really interested in looking at some, more comprehensive collaborative efforts among the interested parties that will serve a kind of more long-term, impactful benefit to the community for, for years to come, as opposed to, just, yeah, just a short-term, solution. So, with that said, we're continuing to enhance our programs for vegetation management, system hardening, investing in different technologies, and looking for more ways to continue to harden the system and continue to provide these safe and reliable service. So if you have questions, the next slide, there's my contact info and Jennifer's as well. You can also get it from David and on the sign-in sheet. If you have questions, we'll be happy to answer them when the time's appropriate.
Thank you, and I think we all really appreciate the effort that Liberty put into in getting power restored at the Monkeyville as quickly as possible. Putting in the backup generator was a great thing, and a lot of people wouldn't have gotten their homes as quickly as they did if it wasn't for your effort. So thank you. Okay, Caltrans.
Good evening. My name is Pam Marquez. I'm with the construction division with District 10. Here to just kind of go over a little bit of what Caltrans is doing. You're going to see us out there. We've started to work under emergency contract. So of course our crews were around while the fire was going on, keeping everybody safe and all of that. But we're going to continue to work. We know we have more to do. So we are working with both U.S. Forest Service on their Forest Service lands that are near our highway. So we are looking at removing trees within 100 feet of the right-of-way, and that is mainly to protect the highway. And anybody that does have property along there, our right-of-way engineering people are probably reaching out to you because we do need to get a right of entry to take any hazard trees that need to be removed off of the private property, but we do need to have a permit to be able to do that. So that is one of the things we're doing. We have started some of that work this week. They have been out assessing trees. We do use foresters for that, as everybody else does, to pick out which trees need to be removed. We only want to remove the trees that need to be removed. We're not here to take out stuff that is still viable. So we are working with the major, we do have funds through the federal government. So we are working on that. We'll be getting reimbursement, but we're still under the state program. There's money out there that we have to spend on this, and we will continue to do that. So we have done the BAER assessment, which is, if anybody doesn't know what that means, it's the burn area emergency response, where they come out and they look at where do we think we might have debris flows that are going to come across the highway, and where do we need to fortify areas. We're looking at cleaning ditches, putting in checkdowns, things like that. So have an assessment of what we think, where we think we might get debris flows, so that we can concentrate on those areas, make sure we get the ditches cleaned out, make sure we have the culverts cleaned. If we need to do any culvert replacements because they've been burned, all of that work will be done under our emergency contract. So our hydraulic folks are working with our geotechnical engineers to come up with what plan we need to do so that we can be prepared for the intimate weather we know is going to happen, right? We all know it. I mean, we're all hoping it's going to rain this year, right? And snow. So, but as what we do with our field operations, our field crews will be out and they monitor the weather no matter what anyway. And they're going to be monitoring for not just snow, but everything. They're on call 24/7. They're going to be out monitoring if they think there's going to be a problem. And if they think we're going to get debris flows in the area, they're going to be watching that. A lot of it is we use where they come up with, depending on types, it could be types of rainfall, how much we're going to get. They'll look at where do we need to potentially stage equipment, have things available and ready to be able to get in there and get it cleaned up as soon as possible and get the highway back open. That is our biggest thing, is try to keep the highways open, keep the traveling public safe, but also be able to use it. So we're definitely looked at that. So they'll, we'll be out, they'll have changeable message signs, they'll do all the normal things they do. So we do have an emergency contract that is in place, and they have, like I said, they have started work. They're going to be working on the first off will be the tree removal, looking at the culverts, what do we need to do, like I said, cleaning out the ditches. There's a lot of deer fencing that was damaged with the fire. They're replacing all the deer fencing, and then they'll be working on slope stabilization, stabilize the slopes along the state highway within the areas that are within our jurisdiction. So I don't know, Jim Henke is also here. He's with our environmental division. I don't know, Jim, if I covered everything.
I think you covered everything. So I'll just real quick, I'll introduce myself. My name is Jim Henke. I'm the environmental manager. I'm the acting environmental manager for the district, which includes Alpine County. And similarly with our emergency openings, we have an opportunity to do this work under the emergency and do what's including our environmental, like the Forest Service and other agencies. We do have a team that assesses biological impacts. We have a team that assesses cultural impacts. Like I said, we do the work under the emergency openings under CEQA and NEPA, but any of the betterment that we do in the future, the restoration, we would process as we do any other project as far as environmental. So.
Thank you, and a special thanks for coming all the way from Stockton. It's a long drive, I know.
Yeah.
Okay, moving along, state parks. Yeah, sorry.
Oh, back up on you.
We're trying to hold all the questions until all the presentations are finished. Yes. Okay, go ahead.
Thank you. I do have some slides if you can. Hello, everybody. My name is Dan Canfield with California State Parks. I'm the Sierra District Superintendent, And I'm here tonight to talk about Grover Hot Springs State Park. We have a few notes so I don't forget anything. Perfect. Slide, you can go ahead to the next slide. Thank you. As you all know, on or around July 16th, Tamarack Fire burned through this area, including Grover Hot Springs State Park. Initially, it happened very fast. My local staff had to evacuate the 90-spot campground, which was almost completely full at the time, in about 15 minutes. And I'm proud to say they were able to do that, and everyone got out safely. Just a wonderful job by my local staff. Some are here represented this evening. Next slide, please. The good news is some of the infrastructure at the park was escaped undamaged. Next slide. But there other damage to the resources and the infrastructure was quite profound. Next slide is a kind of an assessment. Grover Hot Springs State Park became a state park in 1959. It's almost 600 acres. So previously you heard from the Forest Service and the BLM, large land managers in the area. Grover Hot Springs is not in that category, just at 600 acres. Tamarack Fire burned almost half of it, about 260 acres were impacted. We lost 6 structures and 3 vehicles. The structures included our maintenance shop, 2 single-family residences, and 2 dormitory buildings, which is where most of the people that worked at the park lived. Damage to our trail includes 2 footbridges and about 1.5 miles of ADA trail that was impacted. Like other speakers have talked about this evening, we have a great number of hazard trees. I guess our area of influence is not as great, but we do for our operation quite a bit of hazard trees to take care of. About 80 acres of the 260 acres that were burned have hazard trees on them of varying degrees of risk. We also have the fire suppression impacts like the dozer line and some of the other impacts that came with the firefight. Next slide, please. The damage of Grover Hot Springs was focused in a couple of areas. First was, as I mentioned earlier, the area that we had our maintenance shop and our residences. And then also the fire impacted quite a bit along Birdside Lake Trail, which is the park proper. Those areas are represented in the called orange, peach area on the map there. Next slide, please. We were fortunate that some of our infrastructure did escape damage, like I mentioned earlier, namely our water system. So that'll be helpful. Just, of course, a lot of the hookups were affected. There is lots of work to be done. Next slide, please. Including the hazmat cleanup of the damaged facilities, repairs to the critical infrastructure, power, water. Thank you, Liberty, for getting power back on. I appreciate that. Next slide. I mentioned already the hazard tree removals that have to occur before a lot of this other work can happen, before staff can get in there safely. And next slide. As well as some of the work that's been done already on repairing the dozer line and other areas that were burned that we're concerned that we're going to be an erosion hazard when precipitation comes. I will say I've had the opportunity to come down several times since the fire, several times before the fire as well. And I was actually on site at Grover a couple of weeks prior to the fire with local staff talking about this very, what's going to happen if we have a fire like this. And so very proud that local staff, the way they were able to evacuate the park, get people out safely, number one concern there. Now it's all about repair and remediation. As you know, the park is closed due to the issues that we've talked about. But there is work going on now. I shouldn't say right now, but earlier today, we did have staff out working on hazard trees and other infrastructure needs. But we do look forward to welcoming the public back into the park just as soon as it's safe to do so. I think what's most important is that we address the issues at hand. And there's a lot of things that have to happen that are out of our control. Things like weather, the cost of materials, labor resources. Those are all things that are going to come into play that determine when we're able to reopen Grover Hot Springs State Park. So I don't have those answers right now, but I can tell you when I look into my crystal ball and I look at the damage at the park and the speed at which the recovery is happening, which is quick. Great thanks to Cal OES for support, as well as support coming from Sacramento to make sure that we're able to get this work started without a dedicated funding bucket of money right now, but we're not waiting for that. The work is getting started, but I do anticipate when I look into my crystal ball that when we get to the point that when we're able to reopen Grover Hot Springs State Park, it won't be like a flipping the switch going back to the way it was prior to the fire. Most likely it'll be an incremental opening. I can't tell you it's going to be camping of the pool or day use of the pool. I don't know that yet because of those variables that are at play. But just know that I have a dedicated staff working and support from above to get this park repaired and reopened as soon as possible. I do not anticipate that occurring in any time before spring of next year, which is right around the corner. So that's kind of my presentation on Grover Hot Springs State Park. Thank you everyone for coming here tonight. I reiterate, there's great support for the repair and reopening of Grover Hot Springs State Park, knowing that it's a special treasure for both the state and the local community. And I look forward to partnering with all of you to make that happen. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, moving on. California Fish and Wildlife. Third. Kelsey Bella, is that right?
Bella, yeah.
Yes. Senior Environmental Scientist, Timberland Conservation and Wildfire Resilience Program.
It's a mouthful.
It is.
I do have a few slides.
Yeah.
So I'm Kelsey Bella, the Senior Environmental Scientist Specialist at Department of Fish and Wildlife. While he's getting those up, I just wanted to, before I jump into my slides, just say I understand it's probably a little bit frustrating from the public's perspective to hear a regulatory agency come up here and say, don't forget about your environmental permits for your project after, this fire. So anyway, I just wanted to say that we do have dedicated staff devoted to trying to streamline this process for you guys as much as possible. And then I also wanted to say on that note that I realize I'm under the public land section of the agenda, but really Fish and Game Code covers any non-federal lands. So that would be private and then state and local as well. Okay, next slide. Okay, so I work in the North Central Region office, it's Region 2, and we cover all 17 counties shown in bold up there, so that includes Alpine. Next slide. So in our region, we have a few programs. So the Timberland Conservation and Wildfire Resiliency Program, and under that we have a Cal OES liaison, Sarah Lowe, so you guys probably work with her. And then we also have our General Habitat Conservation Program. Next slide, please. So here's our contact information. So it's me for the timber program. Don't worry about writing these down because I did bring a stack of business cards and I can put you in touch with the correct person based on your project. And then we have Sarah Lose for our Cal OES liaison. And then we have Ian Ralston for our General HabCon program. Next slide, please. Okay, so where might your project fit as far as environmental permitting goes? So if you have a project where there might be a sensitive resource or a water course concern associated with it, then you'll want to reach out to one of these three programs. So salvage logging, or if you have any kind of emergency or exemption through CAL FIRE, you might want to consult us on that. Also large vegetation removal projects, fuel reduction projects. Sometimes we get like HOAs, want to do work in the WUI. Those are times we get consulted as well. Similarly, grant funded projects like CAL FIRE, for example, CAL FIRE's CCI Forest Health and Fire Prevention Program. So if CAL FIRE is the lead agency on that, sometimes we will consult if there's a species concern there. And then under OES, it's as mentioned before, the post-fire debris cleanup, hazard tree removal. And then for regular HabCon program, we have, this is just going to be more like if you have a crossing that was destroyed, a bridge that you need to replace post-fire, or you're just doing some vegetation removal or some cleanup in the creek, where there's a sensitive
issue, then you'll consult Ian in our HAVCON program. Next slide, please. Okay, so I have a couple flyers that I brought with me. I don't expect you to be able to read these, but they're also on our website. So this flyer that's shown on the right calls out different fish and game code sections that we have authority over. So that would be lake and stream bed alteration, California endangered species, and also water quality. Next slide. And this slide just shows one of our other flyers, and it calls out like CAL FIRE, our department, Department of Conservation, and the Water Board, and kind of our jurisdiction in a setting that might look like the one in this photo. So links to the flyers are here, but like I said, I brought the two more pertinent ones with me. So if you'd like to take a copy, they're right over there. Next slide. All right, that's it. Thank you for your time.
Okay, thank you very much. That's it for the formal presentations. Now it's basically your turn. And I think what we talked about is that with the Watershed Group is that we go around the room quickly, give everybody one sentence as to what's your priority. And then from that, we can synthesize and try and come up with what the community's priorities are in terms of getting restoration going. So I guess why don't we start at the back and on that side?
Hey, David?
Yes?
Can you hold on for 1 second? For private landowners, CAL FIRE has not been represented here as far as programs available. And so if you can have John come back up with RCF to explain in 2 minutes what the CAL FIRE Forest Improvement Program is all about for private landowners.
Is he here?
Yeah,
oh, okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
Hi, everybody. Again, I want to reiterate Cole's words. I'm so sorry for your loss. I know it's tough, but there is help. And so there's a couple of programs out there that are going to be available in the short term and then in the long term. In the short term, EQIP and CFIP is a mirror kind of grant program that runs through CAL FIRE. And both of those, in a lot of the areas that I'm seeing in the Tamarack Fire, both of those programs could be very useful here, particularly where there's not going to be anything merchantable coming off the landscape, where you're just going to be really, you need to tree shear, pile it, and burn it, get rid of it, plant it, do something on the recovery. Both of those programs are available and funded. And so a bunch of money just went into CFIP for CAL FIRE. Now there's going to be a release of, and this is going to take a little bit of planning, but there's going to be CAL FIRE grants coming out. They're going to be the wildland fire mitigation grants. And so we do expect to, there will be another round of those. Those take planning, but those types of grants to be able to get work done in the hazard trees around the communities in the WUI, that's exactly what those funds are for. And so that could be a really good way to get work done right around the community where we know we don't have the hazard trees in the community. I can work with you all on that. Alpine County Fire Safety Council can absolutely work with you on getting those funds and applying for those grants. And then on the Forest Service side, there's a pool of money that we used to lovingly call the Stevens Authority, but it's an adjacent, it's a non-federal lands grant program that comes out periodically. And that I would expect to be coming out, has that come out recently? That should be anytime, if not. Anyway, we can get more information about that as well. So those grants, the Forest Service grants, the CAL FIRE fire mitigation grants, there's also CAL FIRE grants that are landscape scale grants for very large tracts of land. And so all of those are available, and of course, grants take time to get moved forward, but there will be funding available if the community comes together and plans something. And so that is out there. So thank you.
Thank you for that. I wanna just maybe just start it off with, what we want to see. My top priority is timing, getting things moving. So maybe just raise your hand as we go around the room if you want to participate. There's something that you think is really important and you want it to be considered and want the agency to consider and to follow up with it. So go ahead, Mary.
I would say the watershed for our drinking water, the Mercer and Jarvis watershed.
Mercer and Jarvis watershed for our drinking water. Go ahead.
I'd like to see some help on Highway 89, which is a scenic highway. I'm wondering if Caltrans is going to look up planning and related highway program.
Highway 89. Scenic highway. Did you ever have that? No?
I was just seconding her.
Okay, you put a 2 beside that. Yeah, if you agree with something that's up there, just repeat it and we'll keep track of how many people are calling. Yes.
Hello, my name is Brianna Jones. I'm the acting director for the Washington Environmental Protection Department, and we would like to see pinyon pine used for restoration efforts as part of the climate adapted species. It's been decimated year after year with fires, and we're losing the cultural resources. So if people would consider that when they make these plant lists for restoration.
Pinyon pine for cultural values and just restoration in general. Next. Go ahead, Bill.
Area, considering reduction in water.
I don't see any reason why Jeffrey Pine will not drive here again.
Yeah, so probably the question was, would Jeffrey Pine come back here?
Absolutely. So the question, yes, will Jeffrey Pine be, will it grow here? Absolutely. Would adding pinyon in be a great thing to do? Sounds like a great thing to do on particularly south slope slopes and west slopes that are going to be trouty. Use it there, but don't be afraid to put Jeffrey Pine in here, or even white fir. I mean, if you can get some fir, a little bit of cedar on the north slopes and those areas, it's absolutely going to do great. So don't hesitate. Don't hesitate to plant. And then along those lines, if you can get grass seed down, get it down. Do anything you can to prevent cheatgrass, because cheatgrass is coming, right? You know that. And if you don't deal with the cheatgrass right now, you're going to have to deal with it with herbicides, and then you're going to have to plant it. So the whole thing is get seed on the ground if you can get it on the ground. Okay.
Yeah, go ahead. Corinne Francis with the BLM.
So one of the issues of planting behind fires here is the dryness of the site. And we had to plant 3 years consecutively in the airport fire. So, you know, we planted 300 trees to an acre, hoping we will get 150 trees to an acre. So just keep that in mind. If you don't see them survive that first planting, it's a recurring need to go back. So.
Thank you. Just one other thing on grass seed. After the acorn fire, that introduced wheatgrass into the area with the whole idea was to keep the cheatgrass away. It kind of worked. But it was quite an adventure. There were some county employees that were used to shovel grass seed out of a helicopter. Okay, other priority, yes, sir.
My name is Matt Setti. I've been authorized to speak on behalf of Storm Crow. There exists about 800 acres of slope of the town of Markleeville, 600 of which is a conservation easement. My wife and my company have been authorized to start the revegetation. We're currently permitting that. You'll see a aerial helicopter seeding program with all the conservation easements, which includes a large portion of the watershed. We have 16,000 trees we'll be doing next year. CPL is going to come in and log about 300 acres of this for us. So you'll see a pretty significant recovery being laid out in the next 13 months. That's bordering Forest Service land to the northwest of Marshallville. where the new cell tower is, that we're going to have all that land back in there. We're going to rehab that. It also includes 100 acres on the east side of 89 as you come up out of Markleeville, about 1,000 feet.
So for those of you online, just a description of some work Storm Pro is doing on the roughly 600 acres northwest of Marshallville, including helicopter seeding, removal of hazard trees. So, yeah. Other questions from, yes, sir.
I want to second the importance of restoration with native and culturally important species, pinyon pine. And also be interested to hear more about the salvage logging plans and how agencies are going to use the best available science in designing those treatments in salvage operations.
So the suggestions of the need to, correct if I'm wrong, native species, including
Native and culturally important species.
and culturally important species. And there was a question about salvage logging. Other questions, comments?
So can I add something?
Yes, go ahead.
I'm wondering what we're going to do about secondary field accumulation. We have a lot of hazard trees that are going down and very little market for them. So where are we going to be disposing or addressing the hazard trees that we put on the ground?
Yeah, the question was, where are the hazard trees going to go that are being cut down for safety reasons? Other questions, comments, concerns?
I got a question.
Go ahead.
About how long do you think until the forest is fully recovered?
I will not be alive. I remember too.
And another question, what specific data can be collected from burnt areas to see how successful it is in recovery?
Question was, what specific data would be collected to determine whether recovery is successful?
Yes.
Not, in other words, monitoring of the recovery of the restoration process.
Exactly.
Yeah. Maureen Francis with BLM.
So since I've done a reforestation and restoration project right here, so airport fire, for our reseeding efforts, we use transects and we measure the recovering vegetation in those transects for like 1 to 5 years following the fire. We establish trends that way. For the reforestation areas, we use what's called stalking surveys, and they're just tree plots to kind of look at the survival and the growth of those trees. So we're going to be actually doing another stalking survey in about a week on the airport fire.
Thank you.
Thank you. Don't be shy to speak up. These agencies, some of these people from the agencies have traveled quite a ways to get here to listen to what you want. This is our public land. And so this is your time to speak up and help them come to the priorities. Yes.
So many trees fell by Liberty and then the remediation coming up. Is it a concern that it might attract bark beetles?
Is there a concern that with all the dead trees, this will attract bark beetles? Sounds like a forester question to me. Annabelle Monty with the U.S. Forest Service.
Hi, good evening, everybody. I was gonna let Corinne take it because she's been doing so good, but I'll go ahead and do this one. I've been out on the ground looking at a lot of stuff. I've seen a lot of you out there, and we're already seeing beetles move in. So the standing dead trees are attacking beetles, as well as the trees that have already been felled and are being left. We are actually working with Peter and Liberty, as well as Caltrans, to work on removal of that material to help mitigate that where we can. But the standing dead is attracting bark beetles where it stands. So that's what another component that goes into our salvage plan as well, is mitigating those forest hazards.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
Andy Lovell, ATA. I just wanted to make a request that trail corridors have hazard tree mitigation taken care of so that the volunteer groups can get in and keep the trails cleaned up and get them reopened so we have more economic recovery.
Alpine Trails Association is wanting to be able to get in and contribute to the recovery work on the trails. Many of the trails that we hike on, they've done a lot of good work. It's all volunteer, and I suspect they would be happy to have a few more hands helping them as well. And of course, the Alpine Trails Association has sponsored this meeting.
It's in our plan.
Gosh, I used all those words and you did 3. Matt Zilstein, District Ranger.
It's also in our plan. And to be direct on the question on what we're doing with all the wood that's already been felled, that's kind of driving our industry tour. You know, if we can find some industry to come and buy it, we've already got a deck over here at Turtle Rock, and you know, so we definitely want to move it as soon as possible. That's kind of also driving our, I guess, how we're going to deal with salvage, right? You know, if we go through the NEPA, which is a significant lift for us, to arrive at a decision to authorize a salvage sale, and then we have nobody bid on it, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense, because we could have been using that effort to analyze different types of restoration efforts. So kind of our first step in this process is to kind of test the waters. You know, hey, if we go through this effort to do salvage, is that something that the community is going to be receptive towards? Because that means roads and logging trucks and equipment. And, you know, we've had some mixed feelings from the community as it even related to the suppression repair efforts. So, you know, we have to go through NEPA, which is a public process, to get those kinds of comments so that the public can review the plan, so that our stakeholders and partner agencies can review those plans. But then at the end of the day, you know, when we go up to put a bid and we don't get anything, any interest, then that's a lot of effort that's been wasted that maybe we could have been focused on replanting or contour falling or other efforts on the restoration side of things. So that's kind of our first step. You know, we're kind of wondering what are we going to do with all this wood as well. We gave 700 cords to the Washoe for fuel wood use. We gave another 500 cords to Carson Valley Resort, which is available to any Markeyville residents or Alpine County residents. You go down to that resort and show your driver's license, and you can harvest off those decks. So we've been trying to make it available to the local community here, but we know that there's just too much. So, you know, we're planning some deck sales for the stuff that's already stacked, and then we're also going to try and gauge some interest as it relates to salvage and whether or not it's worth our time to invest in that NEPA step, or, you know, should we be investing that energy in a different route? Because the reality is, you know, Dixie Fire just burned, what, 1 million acres, and Caldor Fire burned 200,000 acres. You know, there's a lot of available timber out there for a limited industry to be going after. So, you know, we're part of that fishbowl and we're in that pool, and you know, we want to be able to do things that make sense. I think that's basically where we're at. You know, where are we going to be able to maximize our efforts? Where can we leverage efficiencies in collaborating with BLM and other agencies and Liberty Utilities and getting rid of this product, because there is a clock on it, right? You know, there's what, Annabelle, I think you tell me 5 years or 1 year for salvage. So, you know, we're working on this right now as we speak. You know, we brought Brian in as a deputy to help because I've got, you know, 7 other counties that we're dealing with, and we're still dealing with BAER work on Slink Fire, which was in Alpine County, and Loyalton from last year. So, question.
Yes, I was just wondering if you could please explain, you said if we can't do salvage, maybe we should reinvest that effort somewhere else. Can you talk about what some of those other things might be?
Sure, like pretty much anything that's ground disturbing, you know, we have to go through a public process to analyze environmental impacts. So perhaps, you know, we're working on exercises to identify areas that would be receptive to replanting. You know, perhaps part of that replanting effort would include contour falling, where we're dropping the trees to basically have cooler soils to be more receptive and have better, I guess, germination rates of the seed stock that we're planting. Or if we're using aerial drones and you know, flying seed, you know, we're trying to create a condition for it that would be more receptive. Maybe that's something that we look to analyze. Maybe instead of, you know, going through NEPA that's analyzing salvage logging, we know there's no interest from industry. maybe we look at just stewardship and looking at piling and burning that wood on the ground or doing broadcast burns on that understory to try and remove that biomass from the landscape to create, more receptive planting conditions. Those, I mean, Annabelle's a forester, so let me know if I'm off track, but those are the things that we're trying to evaluate. What's going to be best in the interest for this watershed? Ultimately, we're driving at clean air and clean water here, and we have limited amount of resources, as all the other stakeholders in this room have, and so we want to make sure that we're investing those in the places that leverage the most efficiencies for all of us.
A couple of comments in the chat first, and we'll get to you. This is from Bill Dunkelberger, the Forest Supervisor. Thank you for providing the virtual option for the meeting. Excellent presentations. The Forest Service sincerely appreciates your thoughtful input. Post-fire restoration and recovery are our highest priority. And then a comment from Federico Farina. Thank you so much for all the organizers of this meeting. This has been the most enlightening meeting, and I really appreciate all the work you're doing to help us in our community. And then the person who was speaking just ahead of me was District Ranger Matt Zimstein. And you had, I think you wanted to address with Mr. Jarvis.
Thank you. My name is Derek Bays. I'm the geologist with, I co-lead the Watershed Debris Flow Task Force with Cal OES. We are currently, and we have been, working with Mary and the Markleeville Water Company to address the water issue. We are aware that supplies, I believe, is 80% of the drinking water for the town of Markleeville. So we know the severity. We know that the water well supply won't be able to keep up with the demands of the town. We have recently run into jurisdictional barriers. Unfortunately, we're trying to find ways around and kind of circumnavigate that. We do have our high-level executive management is talking with Forest Service because essentially the entire watershed is Forest Service owned. So I do know that the Forest Service team is willing to implement protection measures, but I think the timeline is really the issue. Is it could take up to a year, I believe, is what we were told, potentially to get erosion control measures in place. We have about 720 acres of moderate to high soil burn severity land that actually increases the sedimentation rate into the water system that is going to compromise the water supply. So it's a challenging issue, and we have not given up on it. So we are still working, exploring other avenues, maybe looking at other federal agencies too, to say, hey, is there any other resources available? We're just trying to get creative and do what we can. But in the meantime, we will be able to provide technical assistance as much as possible. You have our whole team willing to basically do everything that we can up to the point of implementing BMPs, which I know is the hard part and the part that costs money and requires labor. And it's not just for this fire. It's every fire we're running into this issue for all types of efforts. So it's debris removal. It's BMPs to prevent toxic runoff from burned structures. It's all these things. It's not just this watershed issue. So it's something we've encountered in previous years, and we're trying to find a solution. So Mary, Bill, did you guys have any specific items you wanted to address? I know that's kind of the big part, but
just a point of order. The land is Forest Service. It's owned by
yes, I'm aware and I understand. We've been handcuffed essentially by our higher ups, and it's unfortunate, but it is what it is at this point in time. So hopefully we can find a solution, and hopefully there's something we can do. But it's just like other state agencies have gotten up here and said, hey, if it's federal, we can't touch it, and that's unfortunately just how it is. And we're, like I said, we're doing our best. So still actively working on it. You guys know how to get a hold of us at any point. So feel free to hit us with any questions or anything else at any point. So thank you.
And NRCS, since they're federal,
will depend. We actually are working with NRCS I don't think anybody here that we've spoken to specifically, but we are working with NRCS to kind of explore those avenues to see what they can and can't do. The nature of it being a private company may be challenging. There's also, we'd have to look at like the revenue situation and things of that nature. And really get into the weeds on NRCS's programs and see if they apply. But we are actually exploring that right now. So, sure.
I'll try my best to answer that question. We do have other programs available. We have had talks with Alpine County about our emergency watershed program, specifically talking about Markleeville's water supply. So we've already explained the program to them. It does take a letter to try to elect for that program. It goes very in depth, and I'm going to be the first to tell you that I don't know the ins and outs of it. However, we have had those discussions. So we're going to try and see if that might be an opportunity there. As far as the field office with the Environmental Quality Incentives Program, we can work on public land. However, we have some caveats that we do have to work with the permittee on that land. It's basically like they're leasing the land. That's the operator side of it. Any NEPA has to be completed by the Public Land Agency before we can implement anything. So we still have to work under their NEPA.
I can't remember exactly what state agency it is. I think it's related to the California Department of Natural Resources. But thanks to the Dixie Fire, there's several other water companies that are in the same boat, and there are state agencies that are trying to figure this out at a higher level. We've raised it with our legislative advocates at River County Representative of California because it's not a problem that's unique to us. I know that it doesn't help you turn the water on, but hopefully in the future it will. Okay. Yes, go ahead.
The Forest Service indicated that the cost of restoration is based on grants, so I don't know why it's not coming out of their budget. So who's applying for the grants and when?
Okay, the question was, the Forest Service has indicated that their restoration cost is based on grants. And so where is the money coming from?
And when?
And when?
Yeah, so Matt Zoomstein, District Ranger, Carson Ranger District. Yeah, there's no pot of money that's assigned to the Carson Ranger District for fire restoration. You know, I had enough money here to hire 2 seasonals across 400,000 acres for recreation impacts, right? You know, we don't have it. So as it goes for, you know, restoration, what we're doing is we're looking to Sierra Nevada Conservancy. We're looking to our partners to try and figure out where are these pots of money, where they are available, who's eligible to apply for them. You know, we would be applicants. ABC could potentially be applicants. The county could potentially be applicants. Friends of Hope Valley could potentially be applicants. You know, we're looking for these pools of money. CAL FIRE is another source that, you know, we're being educated on. We're looking at potential for applying through our own grant opportunities, like through the Joint Chiefs Award or Joint Chiefs Program. But, you know, that's a competitive process, and all these other forests that have experienced fires, they're applying for that same pool of money. So again, when we're talking about what we're looking at in these next 6 months, you know, it's really, you know, where can we really maximize and leverage those efficiencies? Where can we show collaboration? Where can we get together with partners? Because those are what puts forth the stronger grant proposals. Timeframes, that's depending on who's giving out the money. I know in November, there's potential for us to apply for a Joint Chiefs Award for a landscape restoration grant, pretty much. So that would be awarded the following season. But you know, I can't speak because I'm not aware of what they all are, but it would depend on where the funding source is coming from. Typically, you apply 1 year and then the money's allocated the following season. And you know, some grants, the federal government federal agencies aren't eligible to apply. So we need nonprofits like ABC or Alpine Watershed Group or Friends of Hope Valley, you know, to be the applicant, and we provide support, and then we can share the implementation requirements. But they're all a little bit different, and it really does depend on what the funding source is. But, you know, there is no allocated budget or process for us to lobby Washington to just ask for, you know, $100 million to restore the landscape of the Tamarack. That is just not the way it works. So.
I do think, though, following up on that, one of the problems that the Forest Service has is it doesn't have the kind of money that it needs for these kind of projects. And that's only going to be solved by convincing our representatives in Washington to open up the taps. It's unfortunate, but it's back to life.
Sorry, Matt Zumstein. One more follow-up kind of on the handcuff comment. You know, we can permit a heck of a lot of work. And, you know, as we met with the Watershed Group already, you know, if they have Cal OES come in, or, you know, any other agency, state agency or nonprofit that comes, pulls together a plan that we can't fund through BAER. Emergency response pays for federal infrastructure. It doesn't pay for private or state or local gov, you know. So we don't have a funding source to take care of that water system, but Cal OES might. And if their engineers come up with a plan, we have a permitting process where we can entertain that as a proposal. You know, say they want to put some diversion structures in, or, you know, on national forests, you know, we can analyze that. Our engineers would review it. We accept it. We run it through NEPA, and then we permit that infrastructure. So it can still happen. But our processes and our funding sources aren't going to pay for it. So I think this is something that I want everybody to recognize, is that we're in this together, you know, and no one entity is going to be able to have a silver bullet and solve all the problems that we're going to be faced with. We got to get together. We got to be creative and just come up with some solutions. You know, perhaps our processes and the pots of money and our funding sources can't solve the solution, but that doesn't mean that if it's a solid answer and it makes sense, that we can't find a way to get it done on federal land. It'd probably be just through a special use permit. And there might be some things that, you know, we'd willing to take on some risk to do anyways under their current permits. So really, I think communicating what the need is, what's being proposed, is the starting point, and I think the most critical need. And the timing for that is now. So thank you.
Thank you. Yes, go ahead.
Back to our priorities, I would like to say from the Chamber of Commerce perspective, they are key recreation sites that we're running.
Okay, that was from the Chamber of Commerce, from Becky. Get the recreation sites open as quickly as possible. Is that correct?
Correct, thank you.
Go ahead.
About the tree planting, is watering the trees part of the plan? I know you guys want to put them in at the right time, but we've been in the drought for like 20+ years. So what if the rain doesn't come? And you put the trees in the ground, the rain doesn't come, you've lost out on all those trees. So is watering not part of the plan?
So the question is, for any tree planting, will watering be part of the plan? Go ahead.
They're doing studies now where companies are putting trees in the ground and they've lost out on all of those trees because no one has backup plan to do watering. And so all those trees die, they put them in the ground again, which next batch dies.
Okay, so the question is, what's going to happen if you plant this year? So we're on the east side of the Sierra Nevada. We get half the rain, or we get on the west side. All right, so when you plant trees, you're gambling. But if you plant trees 3 years in a row, 1 year, you will generally have great success. So I was the founder of the Sugar Pine Foundation. We planted hundreds of thousands of trees in the Lake Tahoe Basin. And a lot of years, you just watch them all die. And that's just going to be the nature of the year. But then occasionally you're going to have that spring that's the spring of all springs. Nice and cold, you get a couple frequent showers. It's absolutely ideal. And it's coming, it's going to happen. So you just, on this side, you got to be diligent. You got to keep at it. And so, and if you do have a failure, just know you got one of the failures out of the way, and do it again, and do it again, right? And it's just like with invasive species, you got to just keep at it. But if you do, then you'll have success, and it will improve.
Okay, we got 3 foresters who are fighting over the microphone. So this is Corey and Francis.
Yeah, sorry.
So, you know, I want to come back to this community when we have some time to go into reforestation and some of the lessons learned and some of the plans moving forward. And I just want to share right now is the biggest success I had was actually very early in the winter. So, February was the earliest I planted, and the soil's ready in January around here. And so if you guys are thinking about putting trees in your own property, do it early. And, I can talk about pinyon pine and other species at a longer, meeting time.
I just wanted to add my 2 cents into this conversation too. I will be honest with you guys. I'm sorry, I'm Annabelle Monty. I'm the forester for the Carson Ranger District. We have done plantings on Forest Service land up and down the eastern side of the Sierras in the Carson Ranger District. And generally speaking, we get 3 to 5% survival. So I know that's a very depressing figure and I'm sorry, but to John's point, recurring planting is a huge thing. Another thing specifically to the watering point, we have technology that we've used in other places called dry water. And it's basically like I don't even know how you describe it, but it's a form of watering. And so any areas where we're talking about doing traditional reforestation and putting little trees in the ground, we're going to be looking at all of our options to increase that success as much as we can because we recognize it's a challenge.
Thank you. Yes, go ahead.
Hi, what's a nod to, more than that, to ABC, to the biomass committee. We have so much material here. And I would like for people just to consider the prospect of using some of that material to generate electricity that would benefit us, would benefit Liberty, and make us possibly electric energy independent in this community. Liberty might welcome being a grid manager rather than the purchaser of energy from outside the area. So I know it sounds pie in the sky and wild, but I really want people to think about how we might be able to use this salvage for something other than more burning in that just creates more CO2 and everything else. I feel like there's so much more potential here than what we maybe has been discussed tonight.
So the comment was, is there a way that we can use some of this material that's being salvaged to generate electricity, which would give us a more resilient source of electricity, and what they call microgrids? I can tell you that it would be great, but it's not gonna, it won't happen in the next terms of the next year or two that we're looking at, unfortunately. Yeah, go ahead, back.
As a private landowner, I would like to know, what does the foresters recommend for planting, like somebody said, plant grass? I would like a resource list of what they would recommend for this habitat. And then also, is there resources that they know of that we can buy seeds or small trees? I know I go to Nevada Washoe Nursery, and I can sometimes get Jeffries, but not always. So we need those kind of lists and where we can go to buy things for our private land.
So the question was, where can a private landowner get information on what species to plant? And secondly, where can they get the species?
Right.
Okay, yes. Oh, here's an answer.
With Natural Resources Conservation Service, we can provide that technical assistance for you. I will warn you, as a lot of public agencies already know, finding seed and trees locally is going to be extremely difficult right now. You're going to have to look a little further out. But if you'd like, come over, I'll give you my card, we can help.
Bill, go ahead.
So, different subject here with Liberty. You know, you did a great job of getting the power back, and we really appreciate that. Can't say enough about that. But Markleyville Village, and other areas were saved. Is there any thought to undergrounding power in those areas?
The question was to utilities as to whether any thoughts been given to undergrounding power.
Yeah, so I can't do a great job of answering this. That would be more for our engineering and planning department. I know Liberty has looked at undergrounding. We do consider it as an option where possible. There's a lot of constraints that come along with that and expense that comes along with that. And so, part of the considerations as a utility and a public regulated utility is the cost to the ratepayers as well to do something like that. So I mean, it's not like it can't be done, but it's definitely would have to go through a whole more of a study by, like I said, engineering and planning, and then we would likely, depending on the scale, have to submit a request to the state for approval, to fund that, to our capital expense and be able to do that. So again, that would be something. It's possible. It would be a long-term system hardening option, and so I don't know if that answers your question or not, but at least and that's something system-wide that we consider as an option, but it's not the easiest option as it may seem, and it's extremely expensive.
Follow-up question sort of along those lines. On the way to Markville, between Markville and Whitford, I noticed that there's wires that are still down. Are those going to be removed?
Yeah, so those will be communication lines or telecommunication wires. So those are like cable or phone or things. They're not our wires. So whoever is the provider, I don't know, Jen, they would. It's their wires. They got to come pick them up. Yeah.
I have more of a comment, not related to electricity, but just for the lady that was over there. There's a nursery in Truckee called The Villager, and they carry Jeffrey, Ponderosa, Pinion, White Pine, and the people there are extremely knowledgeable of where and how and when to plant. So just a heads up.
So those are online. There's a recommendation for a nursery in Truckee called The Villager, and they apparently do have local species that are of interest. Thank you.
I was just there this weekend, and they have a ton of trees, great prices, and super helpful.
A ton of trees, great prices, and super helpful. You can't beat that. Any more questions or comments? Yes, sir.
You can also try Comstock seed. That's who's providing the seed on ours. We've got about 10,000 pounds coming, but it still has seed in the mix. We're using a 12-species mix. It includes bitterbrush, a couple of others, as well as quite a few pollinators. And so different areas will have different seeds, and we're kind of doing a GIS-based habitat seeding specific. But depending on what your area is, it's probably the best in the area for mixing with that seed.
So there's also a recommendation for Comstock seed, which is just down the highway in Nevada.
And UNR Extension actually maintains a list of Nevada native wild seed producers. So if you look at the UNR Extension website, there's actually quite a few that can provide seed mixes that are appropriate with this side.
So another recommendation for the University of Nevada in Reno Extension Department, is that what it's called?
Yeah, it's the UNR Extension. They actually maintain a list of wildland seed providers for Nevada.
Yeah, they have a wildland seed providers for Nevada, which would apply for parts of Alpine County at least.
We're spiritually a little bit like Nevada.
It depends which person you're talking to. Stacy.
It's a little bit different than what we're discussing right now, but and this is more towards Forest Service, BLM, CDF, but it's still part of restoration. How does this fit into your fuels management and your burn plans? Because now can they see where some rocks are and some trails that we weren't able to see beforehand, now that fire has went through. A lot of the ladder fuels and the ground cover is gone. how does this modify your fuels management and your burn plans in the future so that it stays this way in the future, without massive fire? And do you prescribe burns or understory burns?
No, so the question is, how does the Tamarack Fire affect forest plans in terms of fuels reduction, trails, recreation? Am I summing it up correctly?
Fire restoration.
Yeah.
Understory burning, stuff like that.
Don't think you're going to get a response. I don't think you're going to get an answer quite yet. Okay, so rather than, yep, we have two foresters fighting over it. We're going to start flipping coins soon. I'm open. I'll take bids. I can be bribed.
Oh my God. Let's just tag team like a tag team.
Please give me this.
So our fuel specialists are not here right now. You know, there's an 87 burn, I believe 88, that happened near the airport, and really nice mixed severity fire go through there. And so I think in some ways it's going to create some conditions that are more fire resilient. We're going to use those lessons learned of, you know, spacing, variable spacing of the trees, maintaining a really healthy understory component that's diverse. It's not just all shrubs. There's grasses, shrubs, forests, trees. One of the main plans I have is on the airport fire going, or the airport road going into the campground. That's going to be our emphasis, to plant either side 400 feet and maintain that as a future shaded fuel break to kind of break up the landscape and make sure fires that start at the road stay at the road, because that's where most of the fires happen. So I think that there's ways to plan this recovery according to what we know about fire behavior and resiliency.
So very similar approach on the Forest Service side, and I'm going to say something, and I'm going to try to say it in the most sensitive way that I can. We've had a lot of fuels reduction work done for us, right, in this situation. And so to your point, Stacy, of how are we going to maintain that? Just because we've had a fire go through, that doesn't negate our active project areas in this community. Like, we are still going to be doing vegetation management. We're going to be doing a lot of maintenance. You can think of it that way in some of these areas to maintain that standard, right? Yep, exactly. That doesn't mean we're not going to do prescribed burns. I know that's a really sensitive thing to say, and I'm sorry, but it is part of forest management, and where it's appropriate and where we plan for it and where it makes sense, we're going to be looking at all of the tools available to us to maintain these conditions so that we don't have catastrophic wildfire in the future.
Thank you. And I'd just like to say that as a community, we're actually very lucky to have both Annabelle and Corrine Francis working for the agencies. They do understand the community, they care about the community, and they know what they're talking about. I'll argue about that later with you. Go ahead, Jenny.
For your list, I would just like to add what Annabelle just said as a key element for what we would like to see going forward. We've often heard from the Forest Service that they can't do anything in the wilderness. Well, too much of this county is wilderness, and we would like to see those forests managed, because otherwise we end up right back in the soup that we were in before this fire.
So the comment question was a request that active forest management take place in the wilderness as well. Did I get that correctly? Sure. Okay. Ron, this is your meeting. This is your chance. Go ahead, sir.
Just a quick question. A major portion of everything that has been discussed is funding. I have not heard FEMA discussed. Is that not a resource that's available?
I'll turn that over to Cal OES because they're in charge of that.
So this disaster was CDAA, so it's a state declaration. It didn't qualify for the federal declaration, so that's why FEMA is not involved. FEMA, it's a large part of how OES is reimbursed. And actually, since I have the mic, I do want to clarify one point. I don't think I articulated what I was trying to say well, but with the Forest Service land issue, it's not that you guys are unwilling for us to go on the property, or that's not what I was trying to say. It's our leadership unwilling to pay for federal land management. So, and FEMA's not involved. Did you want to jump on that too?
Yeah, I mean, I can't go much beyond that. You know, FEMA will only fund when there's a presidential disaster declaration. The state declared a state of emergency here. We feel strongly that this recovery is important and we're going to bring state dollars online. But FEMA has a pretty high threshold, right? So I can't speak on behalf of the federal government, but there's not currently a major disaster declaration in place here. And you know, it has been a little while. So, but again, the way the state's disaster program is set up, is a large part of what FEMA would do is reimburse local government agencies. And when that happens, the cost share decreases essentially. So the federal government picks up a big piece of the tab, the state picks up essentially 75% of the remaining 25%, the local agency is left with less. So the cost share for the local agency does increase when it's only state only, because we take 75% and then they're left with the full 25%, but there is still, you know, a substantial amount of funding coming in from outside sources. It just doesn't have the federal government's stamp on it, it's state dollars. So I don't know, I can speak at length about federal disaster policy if you like, but that's probably the summary version.
Although the Tamarack Fire did not qualify for a presidential disaster declaration, the Caldor Fire did. And if we can just bring a little bit of that over here. No.
Relax a little bit. Along those lines,
Bill.
you know, it's particularly frustrating when you realize that we spent $30 million on this fire. And we can't get money to try to recover and prevent future. You know, we spent that money. Thankfully, we did. Everybody did a great job. But there's nothing in the works for along the same lines.
The comment was that it's unfortunate that we spent some $30 million. I'm not sure if that's the right number or not, but something in that order, putting out the fire, and there isn't enough enough funding to clean up the damage and prevent such fires in the future. I agree with you 100%. And we've got to convince our legislators in Washington that we don't want to do that anymore. Because they set the rules. I know it's frustrating. We talked to the Forest Service and they explained they don't have money for this, they don't have money for that. That's the people we send to Washington. Yes.
I'm speaking for my neighbor here whose voice doesn't carry. So the question is about the wildlife. Who is assessing what has happened, what is continuing to happen with the wildlife, the fish, the birds, the whole of our cohabitation.
Yeah, the question is, who is responding to the problems that the fire has caused for wildlife? Matt Zumstein, Carson District Ranger District.
Most of the federal land management agencies have wildlife biologists on staff. They're collaborating with state agencies like Cal Fish and Wildlife, like Nevada Department of Wildlife, given that this fire burned across 2 states. So, you know, we kind of our emphasis is more oriented towards the habitat and the species and the ground that they live within, whereas the state agencies are focused on the actual populations. There's also Fish and Wildlife Service who we're collaborating with on these issues. And yeah, and just to comment to Bill, you know, I would love to have access to more money and resources and funding too. So certainly talk to your congressionals, especially if you want active management of wilderness areas. You know, the Wilderness Act dictates what we're allowed to do, and those are some heavy lifts. And I'm not sure that we wouldn't get sued if we were to start going down those roads without changing legislation. So a few comments there, and you know, our pot of money is the $200,000+ that we're going to be putting towards BAER implementation. So you know, that is something that's going to be happening now that got approved, and you know, our focus is on infrastructure, you know, the roads and trails, because you know, we clearly understand that you know, this is a recreation-based economy, and you know, we're here to get those things back open. And I think that includes lifting the forest closure when we get some weather, and you know, it also included the emphasis on getting those roads and hazard tree mitigation of those trails done during suppression repair efforts. So a lot of that work has already been completed. We look forward to finding opportunities to continue with it. We've got BAER funding to support those things along those lines, especially as it relates to the campgrounds. We've got 5, I believe, in this area. So, you know, that's where we generate money as well. You know, I already complained about only having 2 recreation seasons on the entire district. You know, part of that money that comes back to Rangers Die to us is through those concession operations and this revenue that comes into our campgrounds. So this is critical stuff for us as well, and certainly motivated to move in that direction. So.
Thank you. With respect to the wildlife, I'd just like to remind everybody that they were here before us, and many of you may not realize this, but before European settlement, some 4 million acres a year in California burned every year. Fire is part of the environment too, and the species have survived with it. Okay, we've got 5 minutes left. Or if everybody's satisfied, we can. Oh, okay.
Expand on just briefly on the question of wildlife management. We aren't in a regulatory capacity here, but because we will have a big operation going on, hazard removal and debris removal, we do have a robust process in place with Fish and Wildlife that'll bring in biologists and do biological assessments, biological monitoring if needed. So if you see those contracted folks, and those will be operating under the Tetra Tech umbrella, that's what they're there for, is that biological sensitivity as part of the Cal OES state debris removal program. So.
Thank you. Any further questions or comments? Okay, well, I'd really like to thank all of you for coming. I really appreciate it. And I know the Watershed Group appreciates it, the Friends of Hope Valley and the Trails Association as well. This is a big event for us. The Tamarack Fire affected the community, and we'll be dealing with it for some time. Also want to really thank the agencies, all of you. Some of you came from a long way, and very much thank you. And I'd like to give a hand to all the agency people here. Drive carefully and watch out for bears on the road. They can really damage your cars. Oh, apparently there's some cookies over there too. And I've just been told that I might have to eat them if you don't. So.